We're going to begin this morning with a science lesson. Oh. Nuclear power. Nuclear power supplies about 20% of our nation's power. And it comes from the energy that is released in the process of nuclear fission. In fission, the nuclear fuel is placed in a nuclear reactor core, and the atoms making up the fuel are broken into pieces, thereby releasing energy. The neutrons that are released by one atomic fission go on to fission other nuclei, triggering a chain reaction that produces heat, radiation, and then radioactive waste products. And if uncontrolled, that chain reaction could produce so much heat that the nuclear reactor core itself could actually melt and release dangerous radiation. And that's why power plants use what are called control rods that absorb some of the released neutrons, preventing them from causing future fissions. And the energy released from the fission of uranium atoms heats water, which produces steam, which spins turbines that drive generators, which ultimately produce electricity. So simply put, nuclear fission, if uncontrolled, will likely result in a meltdown, producing nuclear radioactive fallout that will be devastating to anyone in the vicinity. But if controlled, can produce years of positive energy. That's it? No. Moshe is one of the greatest people that ever walked this earth. Would you agree? Sure. It's hard to believe that after trying so hard for so long to avoid God's call in his life, he ends up successfully leading God's people out of Egypt and right up to the border of the promised land. And once he was on board with God, he remained faithful until the end of his life. He boldly confronted Pharaoh with God's demand for the release of the people from slavery, even though he knew that Pharaoh could have imprisoned or tortured or even killed him. He also faced constant criticism from his own people, both before and after the Exodus, and he would settle their disputes the best he could. And on top of that, he bore the burden of waiting upon God for direction step by step and was responsible for receiving and transmitting the Torah. Now, one of the remarkable things about the Bible is how it doesn't gloss over the faults and failings of its key characters, and Moshe is no exception. Long before God spoke to him at the burning bush, Moshe tried to stand up for his people with disastrous results, having murdered an Egyptian and then running away for fear of his life. And there are also the other two negative incidents that took place during the time of his leadership. Both appear to be rooted in uncontrolled anger. The first is when he came to Mount Sinai and he saw the people engaging in great immorality. And he reacted by smashing the two tablets upon which were written the 10 words or commandments. And the other incident is recounted in this week's Parashah Hukat. So God instructs Moshe to take his staff, but unlike what took place previously, this time he was not to strike the rock, but to speak to it. And unfortunately, after decades of patiently putting up with the people, Moshe had a meltdown. He had a meltdown. Instead of speaking to the rock, Moshe loses control of his anger, striking the rock with rage. We don't know why God specifically told him to take the staff to begin with. But do we know exactly what Moshe did that was so wrong? Do we really know? We can only speculate. There's a lot of theories out there. What we do know is how God responds. Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel. And again, God doesn't actually say that the error was the striking of the rock. But whatever it is that angered God, we do know it cost Moshe what? Entering the promised land. And after decades of patiently putting up with the people, he lost it. He lost it. Moshe lost control, and he let his anger get the best of him. And note how I said his anger got the best of him. Anger in of itself, you might be surprised, is not an emotion. Anger is a response to an emotion. An emotional response. It's not that Moshe was angry that was the problem. We all, at times, are angered, but he lost control of it. In those 40 years in the Bamidbar, I'm certain Moshe felt offended numerous times. And that Moshe might have felt angry at times is to be expected. But for the vast majority of those 40 years, he controlled his anger. However, not this time. This time, his loss of control cost him, and it cost him dearly. It cost him the privilege of entering the promised land. It's too easy to dismiss the seriousness of this. When we look at all Moshe had accomplished, not entering the land might seem like a little thing. He was probably going to die anyway. Some would say that the apostolic writings reveal he eventually entered the eternal promise when he appeared to Yeshua along with Eliyahu or Elijah on what is referred to as the Mount of Transfiguration. But all that misses the point. Put yourself in Moshe's sandals. To go through all that he did, but not be allowed to reach the God-ordained goal, it's devastating. Everything he worked for, everything he did for his whole life, that one binge of uncontrolled anger. Read in Devarim chapter 3, verses 23 to 26, how he pleaded with God. Little too little, little too late. Pleaded with God to permit him to even briefly enter the land. Most of us would feel the same way. And that's why it is so important to not ever go nuclear with your anger. Uncontrolled anger can trigger a meltdown with fallout that can potentially devastate God's plan for our lives and do considerable long-term damage to ourselves and others. Keep things positive, brothers and sisters. Keep it positive by managing your anger. You wouldn't want your meltdown to blow up God's plan for your life and others, would you? No. I don't think so. Please rise.